When you boil it down to a single factor, you're almost always going to be wrong. And yet, we take this complex medical issue of weight gain and we boil it down to a single factor, and it doesn't work for barely anybody. And people say, well, it has to work. It doesn't have to anything, right? It's like, it doesn't work. Face it.
Welcome back to another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. This is Terri Lance, and I am joined by Jason Fung today. Jason, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Terri?
Very good, very good. So Jason, we've been talking for a while now, going through different aspects of the hunger code. We've spent some time looking at the old broken way of looking at things, looking at calories and things, and we've moved into really examining more about understanding why we may be overeating, why we're eating things that aren't helping us by looking at hunger. We've gone through some information about the homeostatic hunger, the hedonic hunger, and the conditioned hunger. So I wanted to ask you today if we could get down to a few more nuts and bolts about what to do with those various types of hunger in the real world. So now that we have more awareness, maybe even getting better at identifying what's going on, now what do we do about it?
The main thing, I think, is trying to identify the types of hunger, because each of those is going to require a different tool. So if we're talking about the physical hunger, just being ravenous sort of thing, then that's homeostatic hunger. And that's where you have to think about what your satiety signaling is, what your hunger signaling is. And that's really the question. Like, if you want a quick sort of, do I really know what it is? You could ask yourself the question, would I eat a plain grilled chicken breast? It's just pure protein and, not a lot of fat, not a lot of carbs. So a lot of satiety, right? So if that sounds really good to you, then yeah, that's all homeostatic. If it's something you'd say, well, I'm really hungry, but I wouldn't eat that, then it's probably something else. One of the other types of hunger, and you can substitute it with any non-particularly appetizing but filling food. So you could say, would I eat plain beef liver or something like that, or plain rice even, right? So it's a carbohydrate, but plain white rice is not super, super appetizing to most people, right? You have to put flavors on it to really make it that hedonic hunger. So if you say yes, that's more physical hunger. And it's sort of the minority of what drives people these days. That's why we focused a lot on the hedonic hunger, the conditioned hunger. It's that sort of conditioned response or the emotional element. Like, as soon as you take that chicken breast and say, oh, you put some dressing on it and you toss it with some other stuff, then the Caesar salad, then all of a sudden it's a really appetizing meal. But just plain by itself, it's relatively unappetizing. But if it looks good to you at the time, then hey, then that's homeostatic hunger. I get this because when I'm doing sort of longer fasts, it's like, look, that boiled vegetable actually tastes really, really good because you're really just that hungry that any food is appetizing. So if that's the case, then yes, you have to go back and figure out. And remember, that's the homeostatic hunger, which is all about the hormones, which is all about what is telling your body that you need to eat, right? So it's insulin and cortisol. But more than that, it's not simply the food itself, it's the processing of that food as well, right? So when you eat certain foods and if you have this giant spike up in nutrients because it's absorbed very quickly, it also spikes down very quickly, right? So when you eat ultra processed carbohydrates, for example, compared to say slower carbohydrates, right? Fast versus slow carbohydrates, because you absorb the fast one so quickly, it goes way up and then it goes way down, and then it leaves you hungry again, right? So then that's where you want to eat something that's going to take you a long time. So that's where the carnivore diet is very good because, of course, it eliminates a whole lot of quickly absorbed foods. Meat, for example, with the carnivore diet, tends to be slower to digest. And then if you think about the satiety hormones, there's a whole group of hormones that really tell you that you're full. And things like peptide YY, cholecystokinin, glucagon, GIP, GLP-1. Those are satiety hormones. So things that would stimulate those are going to help keep you full. So protein, for example, stimulates a lot of the peptide YY, the cholecystokinin with the associated fat, and things like GLP-1, which is commonly talked about because of the drugs Ozempic. So we know that eating those foods are going to create more satiety, therefore, compared to eating highly processed carbohydrates like white bread, for example. Then that's highly processed carbohydrates, but it doesn't activate a lot of these satiety factors. Or to take an even more extreme example, things like you could drink 1,000 calories of a frappuccino and just get zero satiety out of the whole thing because there's just nothing there. The other things to think about is the processing of the foods, the types of foods, and then the bulk of the food as well, and how quickly you eat them. So there are certain other aspects of food. We're trying to get past this idea that it's all about carbs or all about calories. It's really the whole package, right? So how much you eat. Obviously, if you eat a certain portion of something, they say, oh, it has this many calories. If you double that, you double everything, right? Not only do you double the calories, but you double the carbs, you double the proteins, double. And that's where everybody says, oh, it's called calories. Like, no, no, no. When you eat twice that whatever you ate, you get double of everything, double the stimulation of hormones, right? So to say it's just calories is ridiculous because there's all these other aspects to it. How does it affect those hormones? The processing, like how quickly you absorb those hormones is important. How bulky the food is important. So if you have very, very bulky foods, this is one of our satiety mechanisms. So when you eat a very bulky food, and bulky foods are generally full of fiber or water, right? So you think about things that are really big, like cauliflower or broccoli, right? There's not a lot of calories and nutrients relatively. They're sort of big because they just take up a lot of space. So vegetables are very much like that. And that's why if you look at the volume of food herbivores eat, like cows and stuff, cows have like 4 stomachs, right? But they're eating constantly because the grass that they eat has very little nutrients. It's bulky, and it takes a lot of digestion to get the nutrients out of them, which is why they have 4 stomachs. But at the same time, they have to eat a lot, right? So you have to give them a lot of hay. Even my little pet rabbits, they eat actually a lot of hay. It's because there's just not a lot of nutrients in that hay, right? So that's the point. But when the food goes into the stomach, the bulk of it stretches the stomach, and there are receptors within the stomach called baroreceptors that sense that your stomach is being stretched and send a signal back to you to stop eating. So that's another mechanism. And this used to be a concept called volumetrics, the volumetrics diet, and actually had some data behind it. But essentially, you're trying to eat very bulky foods. And the bulky foods would send that satiety signal. So even though you're not eating as much foods, it's bulky. So you wind up eating unprocessed foods, first of all, which is great. You're eating foods with a lot of fiber, which is, again, has a couple of different mechanisms. There's the bulk of that, but also the fiber, when it gets to the colon, gets fermented into short chain fatty acids, which stimulate GLP-1. So you're creating satiety in that way as well. So, that's another mechanism by which you might create that satiety. And then there's the speed with which you eat the foods and the timing of the foods as well. So if you eat very, very quickly, for example, we all know that you generally will eat more than if you eat very slowly. And it's probably because the satiety signaling takes time to get noticed and affect our behavior. So if you just wolf down your food, then you're going to wind up eating a lot more because you haven't allowed the satiety signaling to catch up, right? And we all know this again. So fast foods, junk foods, ultra processed foods, they're all designed to be eaten very, very quickly. So the number of chews that you have to chew to process, before you swallow ultra processed foods tends to be much less than natural foods. Natural foods, you're chewing and chewing and chewing, and then it goes down, right? Because it's not as easy to digest. Once it goes down, it gets absorbed very quickly, whereas natural foods, if you will, are slow. So you can compare something like applesauce to apples. Apple itself, you have to chew and chew and chew. With applesauce, you take that apple, you bake it, you blend it or puree it. You don't chew it at all. You're basically just eating it, right? It's like adult baby food. It just goes right down. And by bypassing that, you're going to be able to eat much, much faster. And same thing, because it's already baked and digested, pre-digested, your body absorbs it very quickly. So there's a huge difference between how much satiety you can create with apple slices versus applesauce, even though the two foods are actually exactly the same. You're not adding anything, you're not taking anything away. It's the original apple, same number of calories, same carbs, same food. Everything is precisely the same, but how you process it, how you eat it makes a big difference. Even the timing of when you eat makes a difference. Certain times of the day, you're actually hungrier than others. And that might play a role in it. The morning time is the time of the day that we're least hungry. So 8 a.m. And this is just studies of large numbers of people. It's part of the circadian rhythm. Just like you get tired at nighttime, there's a certain rhythm to the natural way that we eat and live. So 8 a.m. is actually one of the times that we're least hungry. That's because there's all these other counter-regulatory hormones around, like cortisol and growth hormone and so on. The thing is that that's actually the time of the day that you actually haven't eaten the longest, right? Because you've just slept and all this sort of stuff. So people think that hunger is really just about not having eaten in a while, but it's not. It's a hormonal state. It's all about the ghrelins and the leptins and all these other things that influence the hunger. If you're hungry, you have to think about what is the hormonal state that's really causing your hunger, because it could be many, many different things. But the morning tends to be the least hungry. The evening tends to be the most hungry. So 7 p.m., 8 p.m. tends to be the most hungry because you don't have any of the competing hormones that will sort of suppress that insulin. So if you know that, then hey, if you're always hungry at 7, 8 p.m., what you might want to do is try to do something to sort of either take your mind off or just get around it completely, right? And it's usually that 7 or 8. By the time you get into 10, 11, you might still be hungry, but you're starting to get ready for bed and stuff, right? So the thing is that one of the things that can definitely induce anorexia, which is lack of hunger, is exercise. So exercise-induced anorexia is what it's called. And so if you schedule a run or something like that at 7 p.m., because you know your hunger is going to be the highest, by doing that activity at the time that you're most hungry, you can induce this sort of dampening of the appetite and exercise-induced anorexia. Because, if you're playing tennis or something, very few people go, oh, I'm really, really hungry, right? Because you're just so into everything and you're exercising or you're running. When you're running, you're not going, ooh, I'm a little hungry, right? You usually just keep on going. Even people who eat during this sort of stuff, they mostly eat because they feel like they need to keep up their energy and all this sort of stuff if they're going for long bicycle rides and stuff, right? And I know a lot of people who do these 8-hour bicycle rides and stuff, right? They're actually not that hungry. They just feel like they need to eat because of the conditioned hunger or they need to keep it up. So any of these can be an issue. It's about understanding. This is the whole point of the hunger code, the obesity code, is let's try to understand what is driving eating behavior. Because if you think it's just about calories in, calories out, I just need to apply willpower to calories. It's like, yes, you can control what you eat, how much you eat, but you can't control how hungry you are. That's the most important thing. So trying to understand that hunger is important, because if none of us got hungry, we'd all lose weight. Obviously, that's what Ozempic has taught us, right? You get rid of the hunger by, in this case, by affecting the GLP-1 system. Then everybody can lose weight. It's very effective. It's not the calories that were the focal point here. It's the hunger that's driving it all. In some cases, it's going to be homeostatic, but you have to understand what is it that causes it, right? It's not only the foods. I mean, it's not only the calories, the carbs, and so on. It's the bulk. It's how you eat it. It's how you chew it. It's how you process it. It's when you eat it. It's all of these factors all together that are important.
And I think that's why you've emphasized in other episodes that we've done that eating mindfully is so important. Not only mindful of the decisions of how you're eating, but that slows you down, that allows you to start appreciating the food and the satiety as you're eating rather than gulping everything down and hoping at some point that you get a signal that tells you. I'm also curious about with homeostatic hunger. Something that I've noticed with a lot of people in our community and clients that I've worked with is, and I see this more a little bit early on with fasting, usually once people really get their fasting muscle built, this isn't as much of a presence for them, but this almost I call it pre-gaming hunger. It's, well, I'm going to fast for 16 hours or 24 or 42 hours. I don't want to get hungry. What should I do now? And they try to kind of load up extra food, eat extra to stave off the hunger that's going to come
Right.
hormonally in 18 hours or 24 hours. So I wonder if you have any tips for people in their day to day when they're getting caught up in that kind of compensatory eating because they fear they're going to be hungry. I think we've all been kind of conditioned to believe that that sense of hunger should be avoided. It's a bad sign. It's something that we should squelch.
Yeah, I mean, it's natural to some extent, but it is ineffective in a way because hunger is a hormonal signal. You can't sort of avoid, like, you can, like, obviously within like 4 hours, right? So if you eat now, you're going to be less hungry at lunchtime, or whatever. But when you're talking about longer, so the food sort of stays around for about 4 hours. That's the digestion, right? So when you eat, the food doesn't disappear right away once you swallow it, of course. Your stomach is going to hold it, it's going to churn it, it's going to slowly push it out. By about an hour, hour and a half, it's out of the stomach. And it differs because, again, different foods transit the stomach at different times, right? And that's one of the things that Ozempic does. It slows down how quickly it goes out. So certain foods, like bulky foods, they stay longer in the stomach. So if you compare, again, apples to applesauce, they stay longer in the stomach. And therefore, it distends the stomach longer, creates more satiety. So it's a big effect. But really, after a few hours, 3, 4 hours for a normal person, if you take drugs, it's different, but it's gone. So really, you're not getting any real good effect from eating if you're trying to target like 16, 20 hours down the line. So it's a sort of natural thing to think about over that fear, but you have to realize that it's a little bit irrational, but also more importantly, it's ineffective because it's not going to help you down the line. And the thing to think about too, again, it's a lot about mindsets. It's a lot about mental imagery. And, what you always have to think about is if you think about body fat, it's got thousands and thousands and thousands of calories, right? So the problem is that if you're not going to eat for 24 hours, say, so you want to try to eat a bit more now, the problem is that you've put it away into this vault and you've put an extra, say, 1,000 calories. And now your body has, instead of, 350,000 calories, it has 351,000 calories, right? It does nothing for your hunger. What I always think about is one of those bank vaults in the movies, where you have that big spinning wheel lock thing, and that's what you're trying to crack open. But stored in the body fat is not easily accessible to the body because obviously, if you're not eating and you can simply take some of those calories out, then you would be full because you could take 3,000 calories of body fat, which is equivalent to a huge meal. And you could take it out of your body fat without truthfully even noticing it because it's like sort of less than 1 pound if you have like 50, 60 pounds of fat. I always think about that's the bank vault. That's what I'm trying to crack open with the fasting. That's where I'm trying to, like in those heist movies where they're listening with their stethoscope and getting the combination and stuff. And then you crack it open, but it cracks open very slowly, right? So it's like you're letting this trickle of calories come back out. But that's the goal. The goal is not the total number of calories in your body because your body actually has a lot of it's super saturated with calories. What you're trying to do is move those calories out from your body fat stores into your body. And that's where the fasting is effective because you're affecting the hormones, such as in this case, the insulin and so on. And then I always try to think about, and again, this is where imagery, mental imagery, mindset is actually super important to success, is because the way you look at things really determines how successful you're going to be. So if you do the fasting, I always think about trying to crack it open to allow it, right? It's about the sort of partitioning of the energy, right? Too much energy has gone into storage and not enough to combating the hunger, right? So I always think about the fasting as, hey, it's like my guy on those heist movies that's trying to crack open the lock and it's breaking open, but very, very slowly. That's allowing a little bit to come out. And therefore, I try to think about how the hunger is actually, that's me trying to break it down, right? And therefore, it's a good thing. The more it goes, the more it's going to crack it open and break it down, the more I can force it to access. And again, once you do it longer, of course, it gets easier and easier. And that's one of the secrets. Then you can go longer and longer without noticing, particularly the problems, right?
I like that image because, of course, in those movies, you never see the bank robber make a $50,000 deposit before they go in to crack the safe. They're just there to get it out. They don't add extra before they do that. So that's a helpful image. Maybe we could move a little bit then over to the hedonic hunger, which I certainly, last time we met, emphasized that I think this is the culprit for most of us for much of our experience of eating for hunger. And obviously, the mindset being such an important thing here. I try to work with people in our community and clients to really slow down the process, that the lower brain creates a sense of urgency, creates an urge so that we will act quickly and bring that relief. That's its job. But that what we really want to do is slow down the process, get our prefrontal cortex more engaged so that it can help us understand what's actually needed. Because the lower brain has I always say it's kind of a one-trick pony. You're uncomfortable, you're stressed, you're sad, you're angry. It has one solution, and that is go get that ultra-processed food. Where we want to get our prefrontal cortex in there to say, yes, I have that urge, so that alarm was wrong, but what do I actually need? What would help me work through this anger? That Hostess cupcake is not going to actually make the anger any less.
Yeah.
It'll make me forget about it for about 45 seconds. So I really try to emphasize slowing down the process, knowing that the lower brain encourages us to act quickly, to make this one decision, to fuel ourselves with something that will make us feel better for a moment. So I just wonder how you think about this response to hedonic hunger and things that we could use to help.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. And I think that one of the big tools for this, trying to get out of that sort of lower brain, oh, I feel bad, let me feel good sort of thing, which is really what it is, right? So you feel sad, so you go get a cookie. You feel angry, so you get a cookie. Yes, it does work for the 45 seconds that you're eating it, and then afterwards it's not that effective. So you do it again, right? But there's consequences to that. And one of the important things I think about getting that out of the lower brain into the prefrontal cortex is really talking. That's where groups and coaches and all this sort of thing are incredibly effective. This isn't new, right? It's just that nobody ever applies it to weight loss. So if you have somebody who's struggling with emotions, what's the classic Hollywood sort of thing, right? You're on your psychiatrist's couch and talking about your problems, right? There's no medicine there, but the therapeutic part of it is the talking, right? So again, you're moving it from your almost subconscious level mind, your lower level mind, bringing it to the top and then understanding it, and that releases it, right? You talk about it and you feel better, or at least it's out there. So now you can sort of deal with it rather than let it fester and then look for these other solutions, right? So this idea of talk therapy or whatever is not new. It's practically the oldest technique in the psychiatrist psychologist book, right? So before we had all of these drugs, antidepressants, anti-anxiety, anti-this, anti-that, right? It's like, what do you do? Well, when you're anxious or sad, you talk to somebody, right? You talk to your friend, you talk to your mother, you talk to whatever it is. And that's the whole idea, is that you bring it to the forefront, you understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then by talking about it, you've sort of defanged it and taken away a lot of its power over you because you've identified it and talked about what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And that's where I remember a lot of old studies used to compare when antidepressants were just getting popular, like Prozac was this big, big thing in the mid 90s. And people would compare it to a psychiatrist who would just talk to you. They were actually equally effective. But the problem is the drug is here, take this drug. And the other one is like, oh, 45 minutes of time. Plus, you have to have coverage for your psychiatrist, right? And make the appointment and all this sort of stuff. So obviously, the drug won out because it was just way more convenient. But I always thought it was interesting that it wasn't more effective, it was the same effective. And of course, people have known this forever. Talking about it helps. The thing is that nobody ever applies these lessons to weight loss, right? Because it's like, oh, it's got to be this, eat this, not that. It's like, well, maybe if your problem is hedonic hunger, right? Now we're in the realm of emotions and stuff, then we should be talking about it because that is an effective treatment. That's where the exact same notion of taking it out of the sort of sub or lower levels of the brain into the higher levels of the brain can be very, very effective. But it all gets lost. Nobody ever talks about this sort of stuff, which I find very interesting because it's like, that there's lots of data, for example, on how we're less connected, if you will. People have less friends, they get together less often, right? That's been a societal trend for quite some time. And then you go to the blue zones or whatever that's described in Dang Buettner's, and you see that they have church groups or they have these social circles where people get together or they're living on top of each other. So there's always people to talk to, right? Or you go to these societies where it's natural when you're lining up for stuff, you just talk to people, you just talk and talk and talk, and people are much happier when they do that, as opposed to where we are, which is that, oh, hey, you don't talk to anybody, you don't see your friends, you have your giant house, so you don't actually have anybody there to talk to just because you pass by them. And then you're dealing with all your emotions, and then you're trying to eat this, not that. You're taking all the expensive supplements and, joining a gym, but then you go work out by yourself. The whole thing is just sort of, it's almost backwards from what has been done in the past. And I think a much healthier way to do things, right? But that's where I see the sort of hedonic hunger is a major driver of a lot of the problems that we see. Because really, I think if we slow down and think about it and talk about it, because thinking about it isn't always you don't always have those insights or different perspectives compared to when you're talking with a friend or a neighbor or whatever, right? There's definitely something there that I think could be explored. That's why we talk about building communities at TFM and all this sort of stuff, because we've always believed that that is going to be one of the major differentiating factors to your success. And it's not because we have better information. The information that we have is like you can find it anywhere. In fact, we have information overload. Like there's all these different advices out there, right? Whether you do vegetarian or carnivore or this or that or Mediterranean or this or that. There's tons of different diets out there. Everybody wants to create a new diet, but in the end, it's about communities, it's about talking, it's about the ultra processed foods, it's about fasting. None of these are new ideas. These are all old ideas that we've somehow thought, oh, they're too old fashioned, right? It's like, no, they're actually part of the human fabric. That's what makes us human. This connections that we have with each other are what's sort of the secret sauce of how things go. That's where you can start to deal with the emotional issues, the hedonic hunger, as opposed to turning to drugs or foods that also can act as drugs. Because remember, foods do make us feel better, right? I'm not saying that it doesn't, it does. But again, when you rely on it for that, then yeah, that's a problem.
I think that also becomes part of the conditioned hunger is that we're going for connection. We're going for our few opportunities, maybe, of connection. And so we've learned to make a lot of our social connections around food, a lot of our enjoyment. I was speaking with a client the other day, and she was really struggling with, my husband works really hard and then he comes home and we like to eat together. That's our fun together. And actually feeling like if I fast, if I don't share that meal with him, I'm taking something away from him. And we had to really talk about how else do you connect? How else do you spend quality time together? so that you can take care of your food intake and your fasting and your health in various ways. But it just reminds me that many of us have turned to looking at food as a primary way of connecting,
Yeah.
a primary way of having fun with someone, and that we've got to keep shifting that so that we're not tied into those patterns in a way that hold us back from our health and weight loss goals.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally true, right? You get together with friends, oh, let's go out for dinner, right? But there are other ways to do it. Let's go for a walk, play tennis, let's go play golf. They're all ways to connect. And eating is also a way to connect. To be honest, it is one of these traditional ways. But when it gets too much, it's going to be a problem. And that's where identifying it is crucial, because if you don't identify that, that's a key insight. If you just say, oh, eat this, not that, you'll never get into the full reason of why it is that you can't lose the weight, because the weight is really just a reflection of what you do to connect, which is not a bad thing, but there are other ways to connect. But that's a key insight. If you think it's all about your diet, you're sort of missing a lot of the complexity of where it is, right? And weight loss has been such a reductionist. People have such a reductionist attitude. It's just the food, it's the diet. No, no, it's the emotions, it's the social aspects, right? The conditioning. Or even worse, is like it's not just only the food, it's just the calories that matter,
Mhm.
right? So you've reduced this sort of complex human behavior to a single variable. Yeah, that doesn't seem like you're going to be successful. It's like if you say, oh, what does it take to be a great baseball player? It's just speed, how fast you run. It's like, no, you could have Usain Bolt out there and he can't play baseball at all. You could have Michael Jordan when he was like the greatest basketball, he couldn't play baseball, barely a lick, right? And it's like, yeah, because there's a whole lot of other skills, there's a whole lot of other stuff that goes into being a great player, whatever sport is. And then when you boil it down to a single factor, you're almost always going to be wrong. And yet we take this complex medical issue of weight gain and we boil it down to a single factor, and it doesn't work for barely anybody. And people say, well, it has to work. It doesn't have to anything, right? It's like, it doesn't work. Face it. The way you're looking at it is all wrong because you're not understanding even the measurable stuff, which is the hormones. So you eat 100 calories of cookies versus 100 calories of eggs. There's measurable differences, clear, unambiguous, measurable differences in the hormonal response. If you eat processed apples versus applesauce, again, clear, measurable differences. Gastric transit time, like how fast it goes out of the stomach, is different. How quickly you spike the glucose is different. You can measure these things. They're not ambiguous. They're not controversial in any way, and they're important. And that's only the measurable stuff. That's the homeostatic hunger. All the unmeasurable stuff, the hedonic and the conditioned stuff, which you and I estimate probably around 85% of the problem lies in that unmeasurable stuff, is actually best served by talking, understanding, trying to get insights into your own behaviors and life, because it's a behavioral issue, not just a dietary issue. The changes that happened over the last 50 years were not simply a change in what we ate, but it's also when we ate, how we ate, how we eat it, how quickly we eat it. All of these different things changed. And then we try to take this and say, well, it's about the number of calories. And it's like, okay, well, that's not going to be successful. What we're trying to do here is broaden the conversation to not just calories. We want to try and broaden it. Carbs is a great start, but it's not the only thing. You got to broaden that conversation to these other factors that are certainly useful. That's where we can start to make some differences, right? And it's like we didn't come up with this. This has been around. If you look at other aspects of behavior or illness and stuff, it's well established how important this is. It's only in obesity medicine where we like to say, no, 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 no. Forget all that other stuff. It's about calories. Therefore, take the GLP-1 drug. It's like, all right, that's fine. If you're taking it and lose weight, okay, I have no problem with that actually. The problem is that if you ever go off of it and you haven't figured out what your problem is, then you gain all that weight back. Well, that's not that useful. And this is where people have been talking about 15-year-olds who are using it. It's like, what? You're going to take it for the next 60 years? That's a lot. That's a lot of drug to take.
But it reminds me of what you said earlier, even about therapy in talking. I think what you're really touching on here, Jason, is rather than looking at just the components of food and calories and getting more to the hunger piece, is really working on our relationship with food.
Yeah.
What foods work for us, how, when, why? Why do we engage certain things at certain times? I don't have one friend that I go to for everything. Different friends serve different purposes and different functions. And I think sometimes we reduce it just to eating the right thing, as you said, and for so long that's been about calories versus it's a relationship with food.
Yeah.
We engage it in ways that serve us, and we certainly, most people come to us because they've been engaging it in ways that have interfered for them.
Yeah.
It's about changing that relationship. And again, that takes time. That's not a medication. That's not a quick fix. That's not a simple formula, just this many calories in, this many calories out. But it's really a more complex relationship to be working on. And to look at it that way, I think can really be a game changer for people.
Yeah, and also the importance of talking and connecting with other people to be able to talk and be heard and listen to other people. Again, in other situations, how many times when you feel bad or something, it's like, oh, I had this great conversation. Now I feel better with my friend or my best friend or whatever, right? Did you actually solve anything? No. Situation is 100% the same. You just complained about it, or they complained about their problems, and you commiserated for a while. And everybody has this, right? Everybody has it in medical school. We did this, right? Where we all complained about, we got together, we all complained about how much we had to work and all this stuff and how we had no time and, this and that, right? Did it change anything? No, because situation did not change at all. We all felt better about it, right? It's the same, from my friends who are lawyers and stuff when they're going through law school and investment bankers, because my son works in banking. He's like, they all get together, they talk about how horrible their job is. They all do. It's true in any profession where people work a lot, right? And then they go back and work all those hours again. But that released them, right?
Mm-hmm.
The talk, that they were heard, that other people are going through the same thing, it released them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same thing. Again, I don't understand why nobody wants to take this and say, hey, there's something important here. We all know this because we're all humans. We've all done this. So to be in a group where you can say, hey, this is what I'm doing. I feel terrible. And it's like, oh, I did that. I felt terrible too, right? And it's like, did you change? No, nothing changes from what you did standpoint, but something changes in your brain when that happens, when you talk and you're heard, right? It's important. And just because you can't measure it doesn't mean it's not important. If you don't think it's important, then you're back to this, well, it's all X, right? Whether it's calories or vegetables or meats or, I don't eat meat. I don't eat vegetables. I count my calories. I do this. I do that. That reductionist view is, I think, very detrimental to the whole area. Unfortunately, the whole area is infused because in the last 50 years, that's all it was, right? I remember in the 2026 American Heart Association scientific statements came out basically and said, it's all about energy expenditure and energy consumption. And it's like, oh God, you're so, stuck in the stone ages of weight loss, right? And it's like, you don't even know where to begin. It's like, I shake my head sometimes. It's like, oh, that's just so wrong.
Well, Jason, I wanted to thank you for moving us forward out of that. So many people have really started to change their approach based on this work that you've been doing. Thank you for being here today. Getting to talk with you about this has been great, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks so much, Terri.
Absolutely. Take good care, everyone.